Hey, it's Alabama Annie with part 12 of the Starlight Tavern, one of my books available on Kindle. There would be a Halloween carnival at the school, which would begin at 5 p.m. on Halloween night after the trick or treating was over, and I had been thinking about how I would like to dress on Halloween. I decided I wanted to be a witch. So after I did my homework at the kitchen table, over several evenings, Miss Hattie and I stitched together my costume from some scraps of fabric that she had saved. We made the dress from black and purple crepe and tied an orange bow around it. We made a pointed witch's hat from cardboard with glue and glitter, and I put the costume on first thing after breakfast Halloween morning once I had completed my work at the tavern. I paraded around in it all afternoon until it was finally time to go trick-or-treating. Some of our guests were already dressed in costumes for the grown-up Halloween party that would take place at the hotel later that evening. And Aunt Mary appeared, finally, in the parlor after spending hours in her room getting ready. She had made herself up like a fairy princess in a costume she had found somewhere or other. She'd put up her hair and sprinkled glitter into it, and she'd painted her face a pale pink and had on gobs of pink lipstick. She danced into the parlor and waved her magic wand around, sprinkling fairy dust everywhere she went, but it was only glitter. Then Lenny arrived at the front door, dressed as Dracula. His face was painted white, and his eyes were blackened. He had candy fangs in his mouth and wore a swirly black cape that his mother had made for him. His hair was slicked back with something or other so that only a few twigs of it stood straight up for a change. We ran around the tavern scaring people for a time, with Lenny saying that he wanted to suck their blood, until just when the sun was setting. Then we took our Halloween baskets that we'd made at school that week and followed Aunt Mary off the front porch and out into the twilight. We went trick-or-treating to some nearby houses and to the hotel, where the guests and Mr. Harry loaded our baskets up with treats before we headed to Lenny's house, where his mother gave us homemade brownies. Then we went into the store, where Mrs. Hill let us reach into the big candy jar and take out all we could to put in our baskets. And then we arrived at the parsonage, where we saw several of our school friends on the front porch. The Reverend's two annoying little red-headed boys were in their rare form, in their pajamas already, their faces smeared with chocolate candy, fighting over a cardboard pirate sword in the hall of their house as he opened the door. We all thanked him for the candy. I had seen Aldous Wells on several occasions when I'd snuck into his house. Well, I hadn't actually seen him that time. He'd been sitting with his back turned toward the door of the room, but I had a look at him when he also came to the tavern to visit with Malcolm Strange, the photographer from the National Geographic, and the day he deposited me at the kitchen door when I had wandered too far from home. And when I first saw him on Halloween evening, I thought he must be dressed for that grown-up party at the hotel. As we were crossing the lane from the church, he came galloping up on that big black horse of his, dressed in his old-fashioned clothing. He was dressed, I thought, like George Washington would have been, with a tricorn hat upon his head and his long dark hair tied back into a ponytail with a ribbon at the back of his neck. He wore white leggings and a long top coat with tall leather riding boots that came almost to his knees, and he peered down at us from the saddle. He tipped his hat. As I looked up at him, our eyes met. He smiled down and said, "Happy Halloween, and how are you all this fine evening?" Aunt Mary pointed her fairy wand at him and scattered some glitter as he laughed. "Why, good evening, Aldous," she said. "We haven't seen you in a while." He told us he'd been busy, but that he was back on the mountain for the winter now. Lenny rubbed the beautiful black horse on his neck and toyed with his long mane as Aldous peered down at me. And a lovely little witch you are, he said, as his dark eyes met mine, peering into them and holding my gaze as if he were looking into my very soul. I had never seen eyes like his before. I took a step back as he smiled again. "Are you enjoying that book I loaned you, Maggie?" he asked, and I said I liked it very much. "When you're done, remember you can return it to me and choose another," he offered, and I said I would like that. Aunt Mary told him we would love to stay and chat longer, but that we were headed to the carnival at the school. He drew up the reins of the horse then and said, "Well, I won't keep you, but remember to watch out for the ghost wagon tonight." He tipped his hat and rode away. I looked at Aunt Mary and Lenny as we began walking, and I asked, what did he mean by that? And they were quiet. Then Aunt Mary said that there's an old tale about a wagon drawn by 6 white horses that goes to the cemetery on Halloween evenings. I didn't know whether to believe her or not. I thought of the night I'd seen that little man in the bushes with those glowing green eyes and that knife by the tree, and wondered if this ghost wagon thing was something else I'd rather not see. I turned to Lenny again. Is it true? Is it true what she said about the ghost wagon? But Aunt Mary hurried us along and said we'd just have to wait. Mr. Harvey was waiting for us beside the car at the kitchen door of the tavern when we arrived, and we piled into the back seat, waving goodbye to Aunt Mary, Uncle John, and Miss Hattie. Mr. Harvey drove us to the school for the carnival, where the older girls had decorated the door and the inside of the building with black and orange streamers, and everyone was dressed in costumes. There were ghosts and goblins and more witches and a mummy or two than I could count. But Lenny was the only one dressed as Dracula, and at the end of the night, he won the prize for best costume, and that prize was a book of wonderful ghost stories. At the carnival, we played pin the tail on the donkey and bobbed for apples in an old wash tub. We ate cotton candy and drank Halloween punch and ate brownies and popcorn. When it was time to leave, Mr. Harvey dropped Lenny off at his home again, and his father met them at the door. I waved goodbye as we drove away. When we arrived at the tavern, some of our guests were parading across the lawn toward the old hotel carrying lanterns, and the lamplight cast an eerie glow upon them. There were ghosts and witches and another princess, a mummy, and some goblins walking hand in hand in the headlights of our car as we passed. It was a very scary sight, and I could see our jack-o'-lantern on the front porch glowing beside the door. I looked to see if Aunt Mary was among the people walking toward the hotel, but she wasn't. I raced through the kitchen door, looking over my shoulder for the ghost wagon. I sat down my candy basket on the counter when I heard Aunt Mary calling me from the parlor. I raced through the dining room and slid to a halt when I saw her standing beside a man I'd never seen before. Her arms were locked in his. He was a short, stout little man dressed as a hobo. He had on a broken top hat, a plaid shirt and vest, and very baggy pants with old floppy shoes too big for his feet, and his face was smeared with soot. "Maggie," she said, "this is Uncle Albert," she announced proudly as I crossed my arms and gave Albert the once-over as he looked down at me with his crooked smile and that old cigar stuck between his teeth. And he looked awful as he tipped his hat to me, so that I took a step back and rolled my eyes at them. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Maggie," he said, "and aren't you the scary little witch?" He bent down, and I could tell he smelled of alcohol. I'd smelled that smell on Aunt Mary before, a sickly sweet smell, some kind of thing that made my nose curl. I told him I didn't shake hands with strangers, and ran off to the kitchen before Aunt Mary could say another word. In the kitchen, Miss Hattie was sitting at the kitchen table with a woman I didn't know, but she looked a little like Miss Hattie, and Miss Hattie introduced her as Claudie, her sister. She said Claudie had come to visit for a while. Claudie smiled and said what a cute little witch I was, and I sat down with them. They were drinking coffee and playing cards. I showed them my basket of candy, and Uncle John pretended he was going to take it all, chasing me around the room as we all laughed and had fun. I let them all choose their pick of Hershey bars, chocolate kisses, and bitter honeys. Then Hattie told me to sit down and brought me a peanut butter and banana sandwich with a glass of cold milk as I reached for a Hershey bar. She put her hand out to stop me. "You can have another piece of candy when you've eaten your food," she said, as I took a bite of the sandwich and drank some of the milk. I looked up at her. "That man with Aunt Mary's not going to stay here, is he?" I asked, as Hattie frowned and gave the others a look. "He's an old friend," she said, "so we'll try to be nice to him if he does stay." She said it wasn't up to us whether he stayed or not, as I rolled my eyes and turned my attention to the candy once I had finished my sandwich. "Mama called Aunt Mary a floozy," I said. "Is she?" And Uncle John raised his eyebrow and began to laugh. "A floozy?" Mr. Harvey said. "That's what Mama and Miss Hattie called Aunt Mary all the time," I told them. But none of them offered up an explanation for what a floozy really was. As I grabbed the Hershey bar, I carefully broke it into squares before I ate it. I ate each bite slowly, trying to delay my bath and bedtime as long as I could, but Hattie said it was time to wash up, so I did one last thing before I went to my room. I ran through the front door to the porch and blew out the jack-o'-lantern candle. Cindy Lee had told me it was very bad luck to leave one burning after bedtime on a Halloween night. And just as I blew out the candle and his jagged teeth and eyes went dark, I heard the sound of horse hooves along the lane behind me and the jingle of a harness. I felt the hair on the back of my head stand up as I slowly turned to see a coach with white horses coming along the lane. I saw the ghostly glow of those lanterns and heard the rattle of the wheels. I could see the face of that driver with his top hat in the eerie light, and I could smell those horses. My eyes grew wide and I gasped as I raced back inside, through the door toward the parlor again, and slammed it shut behind me. I ran for the safety of the kitchen. I ran toward my room with Miss Hattie right behind me. "What on earth has got into you, girls?" she asked. I told her I had just seen the ghost wagon. I had no way of knowing that I had only seen Mr. Billings from over near the falls with his wagon and team headed for the Halloween party at the hotel for the traditional midnight hayride along the Brow. I only knew it had scared me half to death.